breaking down everyday workplace issues and diagnosing the hidden sickness, not just the obvious symptom. Our hosts, James and Kobe.
Did we lose a patient?
No, that's just my lunch.
Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Kobe, he's James, and let's get started with a question. How do we get and sustain buy-in for organizational culture transformation?
Really, my answer is going to, so many times it depends, but this time it depends really on your authority level. So I want to talk a little bit about so if you're an executive, like a COO or VP of ops, you may have the budget and authority to actually start implementing cultural transformations yourself without any additional approvals. But even in this case, you're still going to have to generate buy-in for the change itself. And I would suggest starting with actually the rest of your executive team. Especially in ops, cultural transformation that you implement are going to have a ripple effect through a lot of different departments. So having other executives, other leaders bought into the importance of the change, how, the old way is good, but this new way is better, is going to make a big difference in how we generate buy-in and sustain buy-in throughout the rest of the organization. Now, if you're a mid-level manager, mid-level leader, or director, you're going to have to generate buy-in both up to the C-suite and down to the rest of the team, the people who will be experiencing the change. From the C-suite perspective, you really need to communicate and focus how you generate buy-in based on the priorities that they've set, right? So you, as a director or as a mid-level leader, you should have a pretty good idea of what the priorities your C-suite has set forth for the company for this quarter, for this year, whatever framework we're looking at. And it's really important. You have to tailor your message to make sure that you're speaking to the needs of the people you're communicating with. So with the C-suite, it's all about how is this cultural transformation going to help the company to achieve the priorities that they've already set. Whether their priorities are, internal growth and stability. It would be through things like improved recruitment and retention. If it's external growth, maybe it's through greater customer service and customer acquisition. But really, whatever those priorities are, you need to sell them on how this change is going to help the company achieve X, Y, or Z. Now, if you are the CEO or owner yourself, you probably don't need to generate buy-in from the perspective of getting permission to do something, but you absolutely need to generate buy-in for how this change is actually going to help make things better for the people who will be experiencing the change. We know change is messy and it always creates new challenges as we try to do new things. And if your only communication is really how this change is going to help you, the business owner, or help the business become more profitable, be more competitive, make the company more money, you are setting yourself up for failure. And I can't stress that enough because we've seen what happens when owners try to do something new and sell it to their teams as the company's going to make more money. Well, nobody cares. If it means that they are going to have more work, more stress, and none of the benefits of or payoff from the change, you are not going to be able to generate and sustain buy-in for what you're trying to do. So make sure that you're communicating to your team how this is actually going to be good for them, how this is going to help them in their role be more efficient, and it'll make their lives easier. It will improve the work environment, how tie it specifically to their benefit. Because if you only focus on yourself, the simple fact is they don't care or don't care as much.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, it's very important for people to know that the difficulty, the awkwardness, the frustrations that naturally come with any kind of organizational change is not for someone else's benefit. It's not for people, it's not for a benefit that's beyond them. They have to toil so someone else can make more money or someone else's life is easier. It really does need to be tied to them. And I think that a good kind of messaging, kind of whether you're in a position as an executive or as a director or as a CEO or owner, is the idea of whatever you're doing, realizing that you might need to articulate this whole thing as old was good, but
Yeah.
new is better, is kind of that running theme that you want to make sure that you're not dismissing stuff that was working, that people were comfortable with, everything like that, that you're just saying that that was fine, but we can be so much better, or it can be so much better for us if we go through the efforts of this change. And we have to make sure that any strategies that we're doing are not just the nice to have case or social good case too, right? Because a lot of it's going to be about persuading people to accept not just the change, but also the difficulties that come with organizational transformation, right? So the strategies that we're going to recommend, that we're going to provide you and recommend, are really going to be counter to the normal methods of just saying, well, things will be better. We want things to just have a nicer kind of environment that people work in. We really need to tie this to addressing major issues. And how we do that is that whomever you're trying to persuade and get and sustain buy-in from, you have to make them see that the cost of doing nothing, the cost of avoiding the change, is too great. It's too expensive. It's too stressful. Because if you're just using the nice to have or social good, that's not going to move the needle. You have to make it clear that doing nothing costs too much.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I mean, really, when we're talking about generating buy-in, we're talking about communication,
Mhm.
right? Communication, whatever form that takes, and whatever the specific type of communication that you're engaging in, has to be tailored to your audience, right? We need to communicate with people in the way that they will understand and receive it. I mean, we know this from a marketing perspective, and we do it quite well, right? We create target demographics and avatars to understand the thought patterns and the priorities of the people who we will be marketing to. Marketing is a communication effort. We can take that same level of expertise and understanding and start to tailor our messages to the people that we need to generate buy-in with. If that is the C-suite, you need to understand what their priorities are, what's top of mind for them. If it's the employees, you need to understand what their priorities are, what's top of mind for them, and tailor your message appropriately, because there are very clear financial benefits to cultural transformations. There are also very clear personal benefits from a work-life balance, from a quality of life perspective within the workplace, to cultural transformations. Just make sure that you're communicating the right benefit to the right person.
Yeah. Yeah, so what I think we're going to try and do with this episode is I think we're going to address kind of three big roadblocks towards cultural transformations, and then try and make sure that we tie everything back to getting and sustaining buy-in to those audiences as we talk about each of them, because each of them are probably going to be very, very beneficial for just kind of have a conversation about and hear about for anybody involved in cultural transformations. But we also want to make sure that it's relevant, to the question of getting and sustaining buy-in, but also making sure that anybody that falls into those three specific groups that you mentioned earlier have something to work with.
Cool.
So the first roadblock for cultural transformation is something that most people probably don't realize is as big of a problem as it is. And that is the fact that the biggest barrier to success with this sort of thing isn't actually apathy. It's the existence of performative solutions. Because people often think they have already solved the problem, or they already have tools to solve the problem. So then when you bring towards new ideas for actual more effective transformations or anything like that, the response you get, whether from a staff perspective or from like, or from a higher level, like your supervisor perspective, is, well, why would we invest in this again? Why would we go through this process again? Didn't we already
Yeah.
solve this problem? But so many times when we're talking about cultural transformations, we've picked a single, easy to find, easy to measure short-term intervention that's really nothing more than performative. And then we think that, again, box checked, problem solved, company better. But really, and that's probably the biggest barrier,
Yeah.
that far more than what most people think, which is apathy.
And with performative, we're really talking about those solutions that you put in place that merely act as a checklist or a tick box of things to do.
Right.
They're solutions that, so I don't want to go too hard on it, but sometimes recognition programs can be a very performative solution. Just a tick box of we've done, we hold a annual barbecue. We, do service awards once a year. You're going through, and there's some value to those things as part of a larger strategy. But if the problem becomes, wanting to do more and having people say, well, we already have a recognition program in place. Why would we actually invest in making sure that our managers understand and know how to communicate recognition and appreciation to their teams? All right.
Mhm.
So it's the idea that there are these solutions that are in place that are easy tick box measurements that we can say, yes, we have done this, so that we can move on to something else rather than focusing on solutions that have more of a lasting and direct impact.
Yeah. And like we see this sometimes when companies try and implement like gamification programs or like,
Yeah.
like challenges and leaderboards for like, in things like production or in call centers or stuff like that. It's when they try and insert something
Yeah.
that is very visible and from a very shallow understanding should, make the appearance of an improvement. And again, like recognition programs that are really more set and forget it, or these other kinds of like flavor of the month type.
Engagement surveys fall into, in
Yeah.
my mind, often fall into performative solutions. And
Mhm.
it's not the tool
Right.
that takes it into that performative stage. It's the intent behind how you use the tool.
It's the strategy.
It's the strategy or lack thereof.
Yeah.
Because we often see people wanting to do something around employee engagement. So what do? They start Googling and they find, hey, here's an engagement survey. It's, by this big, well-known company. We're just going to start surveying people. But if you're anytime you're collecting data, you need to actually report back to people and you need to use that data. And they're like, just surveying people isn't enough.
Yeah.
Understand. And anyways, I have ranted about engagement surveys many times in the past, and I'm gonna try really hard to keep my mouth somewhat shut. But I do have to say that these surveys are excellent tools as part of a larger strategy, but we're often focusing on the wrong metrics.
Yeah. Well, and this is,
Happiness is
yeah.
not an engagement metric.
No. No. Well, and that's just it. Like, I mean, even when we go in and do some initial work with organizations to try and assess their workplace culture, assess the situation that they're in, one of the things that we always kind of say, we need to do a bit of data collection to figure out kind of do the snapshot of what things are like today. And a big roadblock to us doing some of the initial work is like, well, we already collect information. Why would we pay you to collect information? We're like, well, that's a fair point, but what's the information that you're collecting? What do you use it for? Where does it come from? Like, what is the strategy behind it? And those tend to be tougher questions, but this is just it. They put in some standard set it and forget it type of like employee surveys or just like demographic information that they know they're supposed to be collecting it, so they do. But the act of collecting it is the performative solution. We can tangibly see how much data that we have. So
We
that,
have done an engagement survey this quarter.
yeah,
Box checked.
exactly. So then why would we need to do anything else? Is that big roadblock. We do something, whether that something is absolutely devoid of a strategy or just appears like it's helpful, And then, so why would we do anything else, even if you have a bigger strategy that can really help us? Why would we do something we've already invested in it? It is such a big problem. So one thing by identifying this problem, we want to make sure that we can provide you listening with how do you get around this? How do you resolve this? How do you avoid this roadblock? And the biggest reason is I think that the response or the approach you have to take to it is kind of using a bit of a sickness versus symptom approach, right? Like these are, identifying, the things that you might be addressing, the problems that you are trying to address with these performative solutions. Like, again, if morale is low, implementing like Pizza Fridays is addressing the symptom, not the sickness. And the kind of the way that I've described it to clients is I've said, think about it like vehicle maintenance. What you're doing with this, well, again, let's say Pizza Friday, is you're turning up the radio to mask the sound of your brakes grinding, right? You have covered it up,
Yeah.
and you've done something. And the idea is, but the fact is that you're still paying for this problem, despite the fact that you don't hear the grinding anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Or it's almost like whenever we survey employees, they tell us they're unhappy, so we just stop surveying them, right? Like, I mean, there's that
Yeah,
simple.
I remember hearing that one.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
man, it's hard to keep a straight face in
Oh, it
some
is.
conversations.
It's
Uh,
so.
I've got a bad poker face. I really need to work on that.
Yes, luckily sometimes those happen not when we're in person. Most of those tend to happen over like virtually, so
Yeah, early engagements.
yeah, a little easier to cover it up.
Yeah.
But the thing too is that, so part of what you have to realize too is you have to try and help the audience. So if you are executive or director or whomever, and you're trying to persuade your audience, then using this symptom versus sickness approach to try and separate the two.
Yeah.
One of the ways that we often find it helpful to do that is we have something that we call labor value loss statistics, and we actually have a podcast episode from last season. It's so season 2, episode 4, about the cost of doing nothing about your workplace culture, where we identify, we tie problematic workplace culture issues directly to loss of employees' annual salary. Like, sort of, for example, poor communication strategies in your workplace can cost 21% of the average employee's annual salary in loss of productivity, in things being missed, in mistakes, and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Burnout and related absences and loss of productivity from burnout can cost as close to 25% of the average employee's salary. And a incivility in your workplace can cost about 26 of an average employee salary. So these three problems, again, poor communication, burnout, and incivility, are the sickness. And you have to realize that you have to treat the sickness if you actually want to start to move beyond performance solutions and actually make a difference. So using that type of addressing the sickness kind of business case focus, the cost of doing nothing is too high. We are already losing 21% of the annual employee salary because of how bad our internal comms are. That type of information can help move past this performative solution roadblock and actually help you get to the sickness, not just chasing the symptoms.
Yeah, I really like the incivility stat. I like the language around incivility. I'm glad that there's more conversations happening about incivility in the workplace, because it's not just about conflict, or it's not like always the overt stuff. Incivility can take many forms, and it's a terrible thing, but it's a nice way of in my mind, it's a better way of getting to the heart of it, because when people are incivility comes from people feeling like they aren't valued, people feeling like they are, people being dissatisfied in their job, right? We talk about job satisfaction or dissatisfaction a lot because it impacts everything else that you will do. If people are actively upset with the factors of their workplace, with their manager is inconsistent and they have no job security and the wages are garbage and there are no wellness supports and all of these other pieces that are, it makes people upset. It makes them quicker to anger. It makes them become frustrated and burnt out and all of these other problems, and it creates that incivility in the workplace, which has a direct cost on your bottom line.
Yeah. And that's just it. So like, inserting the stat, like again, incivility can cost about 26% of the average employee's annual salary per employee involved in this workplace. So that's multiple employees, that's multiple 26%, right? Is a problem that you are already paying for. You are paying for this problem despite the fact that maybe the survey you're doing or the pizza Friday or the whatever the performance solution that you've probably already invested in, you're not hearing the grinding of your brakes anymore, maybe, but it doesn't mean that the problem still isn't persistent, that you're still not paying for it. And this is why moving aside or setting aside, at least temporarily, the performative solutions to actually hear the sound of your brakes grinding,
Yeah.
turning the radio down so you can actually hear the sound, is something that is essential if you actually want to stop chasing the symptoms and start addressing the sickness head on.
And I do just on this, one thing that I do want to make clear is that we don't recommend clients don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to tell you that what you're doing is wrong,
Right.
right? Because on any of these strategies in and of themselves are not bad, but they have to be connected to a larger purpose.
Right.
Because if you're just implementing, I won't call them strategy. If you're implementing solutions without a strategy, then it's just taking shots in the dark, right?
Yeah.
We need to understand what's happening and then tailor our actions and our solutions to actually address what we want to address. That's how we craft a strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. So often this idea of using things like the statistics around labor value loss is a helpful business case to present when you're pushing the idea up. So if you're an
Yeah.
executive or director mid-level leader, getting the message up there, using that kind of business case, and again, maybe even using the stop chasing symptoms, start addressing sicknesses kind of approach can be a helpful way to start getting that buy-in for
Yeah.
the needed change. Whereas the employees probably don't need as much if persuasion because they're probably experiencing it being performative, it being something they have to do that doesn't really make a difference. So almost like listening to them and having their concerns about something that's performative be validated, that's probably going to be a big way that for the CEO or owner or whomever or executive, anybody that's trying to push it down to the employees, how you can help maintain and sustain buy-in from them. It's probably just going to be by listening to them and hearing their concerns, but also knowing what's working and what's not. Like you say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't just stop everything. Just gather the data, collect the intelligence you need to know what's working and what's not, so you can actually, again, head on address the sickness.
And I do want to say generating buy-in up or making sure that your leadership, your executive, your CEO is bought in is not just about getting permission.
Right.
Because what they need to buy into is the commitment to follow through with this. Because the biggest problem I've seen with getting employees to actually buy into any new change is not the value of the change itself. It's pretty easy to articulate how, addressing a lot of workplace factors are going to make their work environment better. It's that so often we've broken trust, right? We try put a solution in place, it doesn't work, so we toss it. And if gets to a point where employees feel like this is just another flavor of the month, we're going to do this for a little while, I can just ignore it for the next 3 months and we'll be back to the way things always were. If you do not have the commitment from your executive, from your CEO to follow through, then that is very likely the challenge that you're going to experience in trying to get employees bought in.
Yeah.
I mean, I can think about a specific client that we've been working with where, man, having the CEO like understand and really become the champion of this project has
Mhm.
just fundamentally changed the conversations with employees, right?
Mhm.
It becomes a part of the organization's DNA.
Mhm.
And I mean, they're taking time out of their schedule to show up at each session and reinforce the importance in person to make sure that employees know that there is a clear commitment from the organization and from themselves that this is not a flash in the pan. This is now the new way we are going to do things, and the results, the buy-in and the participation is wonderful. From our perspective, it's fantastic
Yeah,
because people are really connecting to it. But I have to give credit where credit's due. It's the CEO gets it and they have made it a priority, and them championing it has made the difference in buy-in.
absolutely. No, and that's a really, really good point. Okay, so let's
I
move
know.
on.
That's why I made it.
Very helpful. Okay, so let's move on to the second roadblock, and this is one that we probably hear the most often,
Hmm.
which is people being too busy to be better. And this is just it, is that we're too busy to improve. We're too busy to implement this thing. We don't have the time to be able to kind of add something new to our plate. And again, that's the reality in many organizations. And the thing is that, like we said in the, I was talking about performance solutions, sometimes the business case can be a helpful tool to address that roadblock. This roadblock doesn't matter how good the business case is, because it's a matter of they're too busy, or they're too stressed, or there's too much on their plate, or they're too burned out. So that's the thing that you have to address. You have to make this we're too busy to be better kind of roadblock. The result is going to be about trying to find ways to reduce stress, increase efficiencies, is going to be how that you do that. Because we work with a number of businesses that are faltering and are on the precipice of collapse, or getting close to it. And they can't slow down enough to kind of avoid the cliff.
Yeah.
And part of, and part of it is that because they just can't add anything more on their plate because they're just trying to keep their heads above water. And what's tough is that is a major issue. But it's the idea though is that, um again, not doing anything, the cost is too great. So you have to figure out what is the thing that's going to have the most impact on them. And largely it's going to be about how do we reduce the stress, create efficiencies, how do we give them the intervention that will make a difference, because we have to basically get things off people's plates if we're going to be able to actually not just get buy-in and sustain buy-in, but actually see the transformation through to its completion. And that is probably one. So too busy to be better is probably one of the most common problems that
Yeah.
we see. It's a major roadblock.
I like the analogy of the cliff because oftentimes, and clients or potential clients will identify that they are running full tilt towards a cliff, right?
Mhm.
These problems aren't getting better, but they're still headed in that same direction. They see the cliff coming. They're
Mhm.
running full tilt towards it. How do you like this conversation is really hard for people to not to understand, but to wrestle with,
Yeah.
I think.
Mhm.
And honestly, where you need to go is if you are in fact feeling like you are too busy to change, you need to increase your capacity. It's easy to say it,
Mhm.
but it's going to cost you time, energy, and resources to do
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
You can either continue to run full tilt towards the cliff and your retention problems are going to get worse, your productivity is going to continue to be laggard, you're going to reinforce a culture of complacency rather than innovation, right? You're going to continue to see the problems that have been plaguing your business until you actually make that effort to change. And sometimes that means bringing in outside help to take some of these things off your plate. whether it's outside help to take off some of the other pieces off your plate so that you can focus on this, or bringing in outside help to focus on this so that you can continue to run the business the way that it needs to be run. We've talked in the past that there are lots of different ways that you can do that. I mean, obviously, we're a little bit biased because we do this work, and absolutely, you should hire us. We're awesome. But but that's not the only solution, right? Realistically, that's not the only solution to achieving to increasing your capacity. You need to find a solution that works for you. That might be fractional expertise that you bring in for a short time, that where you can offload some of these. So if you are responsible for marketing and HR and sales and everything else, bring in some experts to take stuff off your plate, especially around there's lots of great ROI that you can achieve from accessing fractional expertise or part-time expertise, or right. You're probably not in a position where you're going to be able to hire a VP of cultural transformation or or even a CHRO, but you can access that skill set much cheaper by approaching it from a fractional standpoint. I know I'm kind of harping on that one piece, but it's an easy way of increasing your internal capacity without significantly increasing your labor costs.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that I think the sad reality is when it comes to this too busy to be better roadblock, the truth is that addressing this problem always requires a bigger upfront investment to get things started.
It does.
There's just no way around it, because I mean, you have to increase your capacity, and you have to pay for it. It's unfortunate, but the reality is how much is your mental health worth?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like these are some hard questions we have to be asking ourselves. Like, what would it be like to not have to spend 4 hours a day on just putting out employee fires, or having your workday start right when you wake up and end right when you pass out from exhaustion, right? What is it worth to, again, have this thing that keeps you up at night, resolved, or at least having the support to do it? Like, what stress is? Stress is when we face a challenge, but we don't feel we have the resources to battle it.
Yeah.
When we feel that we don't have the resources to battle it, that's what really creates stress. And the answer to how do you avoid this, how do you reduce the stress around these problems is going to be, you have to increase the resources that you have to address it. So the real question is, and this is something that if you're thinking this to yourself, or if you're, again, executive or director or CEO or owner, the question is, what is this worth? What is your mental health worth? And that's the questions that you may need to be asking yourself, or may need to be asking those above you, because there's no way around the fact that there's going to be a larger upfront cost to this. But again, what's it worth?
Cost is probably the most common factor in the too busy to be better, but it's not the only one that we've seen. And I'm thinking specifically about conversations we've had where, it hasn't been about the cost, because the company is quite profitable. It's more about the leaders' lack of confidence in their own skills. And not feeling like they can pass over control to somebody else, right? That feeling of needing to grip the reins really tightly, because my perspective was it more of a I don't feel confident that if I pass it on to somebody else, it's going to be done the way that I want, or and that's a real fear. Right? That's a realistic trap that many people fall into. It's not an excuse it's a reason for not doing things differently, but it's not an excuse, right? We have to understand that this fear of giving up control we can hold on tight to the reins and continue to run towards that cliff. The only way we're going to make a change is if we actually start to shift the direction that we're headed. And that involves building some trust and making sure that the CEO, the leader, whomever is kind of holding those reins, understands not only the value that will come from this, but how it will actually help them maybe not increase the amount of control that they have, but definitely increase the amount of accountability around what's happening, right? We need to look at putting accountability frameworks in place so that they feel confident in being able to pass over control. Because if you don't have any structure around delegation, then yeah, you're not going to know how are you going to evaluate whether or not somebody's been successful. So all of that to say, there are still strategies. Resources aren't the only piece, definitely the biggest one that we see, but that fear of giving up control, it tends to be another element that we see in the too busy to be better.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to say on that is that it's not just at the leadership level that this
Yeah.
desire to not give up control, or this too busy to be better, or everything is, like I have too much on my plate to move forward these initiatives. It happens at the employee level too. But part
Yes.
of it,
That's a good
again,
point.
it is also making it clear when you're trying to get the same buy-in from your everyday employees, is that again, we're doing things differently. It's going to be, it's a bit awkward. We're going to be giving up some, some stuff by passing it off to your coworkers or by bringing in other people. But it's a matter of, again, regardless of who you're trying to get the same buy-in from, what population you're talking to, I really do think the question of how much is your mental health worth is something that I think should be kind of the fundamental thing that you tie this all your communications around. Is that yes, it's going to be different. Yes, it's going to be awkward. Yes, we're going to have to give up some stuff, some control. But how much is our long-term mental health worth? I think does help kind of frame that a little bit better.
Again, we're tying it to the direct benefit that they will see rather than, the benefit that the benefit that the company will get out of it, right?
Right.
Make sure that you're targeting and tailoring your message to the fears and priorities of the people you're talking to.
Absolutely. Okay, so the third roadblock, cultural transformation, does connect nicely with the one we just talked about. But the third one is the sticker shock
Hmm.
of what it will take to make the transformation, or to improve things. This stuff does cost money. This stuff often has, again, let's say the last one, often there's a bigger upfront investment when you're trying to bring in increased capacity, right? Having people, experts to help you through this stuff, requiring tools, again, the long-term commitment, all those things come with a cost. And the sticker shock of it can be a huge roadblock for people, even when, again, they see the ship is sinking, and they just, they just they know it's coming. There's a bit of cognitive dissonance that happens where they know it's coming, they know they have to do it, but that sticker shock, the cost of it is just something that they just can't swallow, and they end up procrastinating, and then the costs go up because the
Yeah.
longer you wait, the more expensive it gets, and the deeper the ship is sinking. But it is something that, we just kind of have to accept that good help, good solutions are not cheap, and you get what you pay for.
And I think this is a big contributing factor to why we see so many performative solutions,
Yeah, that's a good
right?
point.
Because as we said, performative solutions tend to be when you approach something as a set it and forget it mentality. We can buy this survey once. We can buy this tool, we can do this thing, and it may not be the best thing that we can do, but it's something that we can do. And it's let's put it in place and hope for the best type of mentality. It's like we've said, devoid of strategy, but taking a strategic approach to things takes time, energy, and resources. Buying a pre-built solution and plugging it into your workplace tends to be cheaper. It also tends to be far less effective.
Right.
Right. So yeah, the sticker shock is absolutely a major stumbling block. And I think um, while it's a huge barrier on its own, I think it's a big contributing factor to some of the other barriers as well.
Absolutely. And really, the only way to address the sticker shock side of it is to tie everything back to return on investment, right? Like the ROI has to be there. And again, going back to when we talked about things like labor value loss stats, like again, the cost of incivility, the cost of poor communication, the cost of burnout related absences, all those things we talked about in season 2, episode 4 of the podcast are great kind of points to kind of help, show you the cost of maintaining the course. And this is
Yeah.
the whole point, right? Doing something has a price tag, and we're telling you it's not going to be a small price tag. But how you combat the sticker shock, a, a large strategy is showing through things like the labor value loss stats what it cost to do nothing.
Yeah.
Because you are going to spend one of those two things. You're
Yeah.
either going to spend to work on the solution, or you're going to spend for the problem to get worse. Money is getting spent one way or another. And that ties people's hands to they have to make a decision. Either they choose to act or they choose to let the problems
Yeah.
fester and get more expensive. It is an active choice, and
Yeah.
you can't avoid it.
And that's why I really like that discussion around ROI and the cost of doing nothing, because there are a lot of less tangible costs that don't show up on a balance sheet that have a significant impact on our profitability. And you said it well, that either way, once you're presented with the information, you need to make a choice. Doing nothing is a choice. It's not a good choice, but it's a choice that you are free to make. I mean, you can choose to continue to drive the to run towards that cliff and jump off.
Mhm.
Would I recommend it? No.
Yeah.
You're free to choose it, but you also have the choice to take a detour,
Mhm.
to do something different. Yeah, it's going to cost you. Yep, it's going to be messy. And yep, it's probably not going to work out 100% the first time. That's why we iterate. And that's why we need long-term commitment. Because when you're talking about, especially cultural transformation, when you're talking about working with people, people are messy. And we're not going to get everything right out of the gate. Recognizing that these things there are immediate ROI that we can achieve, but your biggest ROI and the long-term benefits that your company will see don't come in the first month, right?
Yeah.
They come 3, 6, 9 months out, right? And so committing to change is vital.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we work on this stuff, we always try to show tangible improvements. We always try and show
Yeah.
how things are moving forward. We can't show you the quick ROI in a month. We can show you signs of improvement that's going to speak to
Yeah.
the ROI. So it's not just like hold your breath, cross your fingers for 6 months. A good cultural transformation strategy has tangible measurements and analytics and data intelligence to show improved progression. So it's not just a hope for the best, right? But again, those types of really focused, committed strategies don't come cheap. You can't buy them in a box. You can't buy them in software. But what you have to do is if you are in the position as executive, a director, CEO, owner, you have to, whomever you're making this desire to get and sustain buy-in from, you have to make the cost of doing nothing too great.
Mhm.
You have to make the fact that we are making a choice, and it's an expensive choice either way.
Yeah.
But doing nothing is not really an option. It's letting the boat sink, or it's investing in fixing it, right? And if you want to, and there are some ways that you can kind of start to get an idea about how much how vulnerable you are to some of these things. Like we have some tools in our Ocean suite of diagnostic tools that kind of assesses vulnerability that can be helpful. But there are signs that you can actually use to kind of help make that where, the cost of doing nothing is too great a strategy. Because really what you have to do is you need to get your audience to a place where they understand they can't afford to not do the transformation. They can't afford to not invest it. They can't afford to not support it long term. That's really where you have to get your audience to if you really want to kind of, again, get past the sticker shock roadblock.
Yeah, I just want to go back to when you were talking about metrics, because let's be serious. Sometimes, like you may be listening to this and you may be tasked with implementing a transformation yourself. And so, how do you start to build metrics in? We'll give you a little bit of the secret sauce. It's not, I mean, when we say it, it's kind of obvious, but really, one thing that I would highly recommend if you are responsible for this and you are preparing for a cultural transformation, you need to identify what it is that you are trying to change, not just the symptoms of the change, but the sickness, right? Create some we love benchmarking activities. You need to understand where you're starting. So before you start messing with things, before you start implementing change, do a benchmarking activity to understand the current status of X, Y, and Z, whatever it is that you are trying to change. Then what you're able to do is over time, you're able to repeat that activity. You're able to take snapshots in time to show that, from where we started to 3 months in to 6 months in, what, maybe quarterly, whatever that frequency is, you're able to show improvements over time. The funny thing is, and I warn clients about this because I've seen it many times, is that do not be surprised that your scores actually dip after your initial benchmarking, right? So you do your benchmarking at the beginning and then you start messing with stuff. And the response on that benchmarking may actually be lower because people are actively going through the messy transition of the change. Carry on, push through. Because as you move forward, as you can continue to commit to the change, you will see those benefits. And then you can take those benchmarking, however you determine to do the benchmarking activities, you can take that back to the C-suite, to the executive, to the whomever, and show that doing something is a lot better than doing nothing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, I think let's do a little bit of a summary. I think this was a pretty good conversation. So the question was, how do we get and sustain buy-in for organizational culture transformations? Well, largely we want to make sure that we're addressing this question from a few different audiences, from executives, from directors, from CEOs, from owners, and even from an employee's perspective. You have to kind of understand the audience that you're trying, in the position that you're in, the audience you're trying to speak to, who you're trying to get the same buy-in from. And usually it's going to be about pushing it up to the top and making sure that you're covering the bases of everyday employees. But one of the things you have to realize is that this type of approach that we're going to suggest is counter to what the normal methods around change is, which is about nice to have and social good costs. The core of it is you have to make people see that the cost of doing nothing is too great. Now, the roadblocks to this thing that we often run into can be really problematic. And the three of them that we identified were: the first is the existence of performative solutions. They become the biggest barrier because people already think they're doing something, they're already investing in it, they already have a solution in place, but they don't really fully see the complexity of the problem. They think a simple off the shelf or small investment piece is going to make the difference, but all it really does is just mask the problem, like turning up your radio to drown out the sound of your brakes grinding. You really have to look at what's going to be the full strategy, and if it's looking like it's going to be an easy fix, you probably have the wrong tool.
Fair.
The second roadblock is the problem of being too busy to be better. And this is about people being too overloaded, they're being too much on their plate, and they're not able to carve out the necessary time, effort, and to actually make the change. This usually requires bringing in some type of intervention to either help take off the operations off your plate so you can focus on the problematic areas, or it's going to be about bringing in experts to help you with the problematic areas. Either way, there's going to be a significant investment required of time, effort, and energy. But the real questions you have to ask yourself is, how much is your mental health worth? Because this type of running towards the cliff and being too busy to improve the environment and the culture is going to be a problem that's just never going to get any cheaper, never going to get any easier. And the longer you wait, the bigger that investment's going to have to be. Which leads us to the third roadblock, which is sticker shock with cultural transformations. This stuff is not expensive. This stuff is not easy. This stuff is not quick. But the only way that you're going to actually improve the sticker shock address the sticker shock problem is to really tie everything back to the ROI and making sure that it's clear the cost of doing nothing is too great. Because doing nothing and ignoring the problem or delaying it or procrastinating is still an active choice, and it's an expensive choice. So if you want to address this problem, you have to make the ROI clear that there's a cost to doing it and a cost to not do it. And likely the cost to not do it is going to end up being greater, especially in the long term. But you have to make that case because you have to move people into a position where they understand that they cannot afford to not do the transformation or ignore the problem anymore. All right. So that about does it for us. For a full archive of the podcast and access to video version hosted on our YouTube channel, visit roman3.ca/podcast. Thanks for joining us.
For more information on topics like these, don't forget to visit us at roman3.ca. Side effects of this podcast may include improved retention, high productivity, increased market share, employees breaking out in spontaneous dance, dry mouth, aversion to the sound of James's voice, desire to find a better podcast.